This fish went from being a bottom dweller that nobody really cared that much about, where it was quite popular with fish and chips, to probably one of the most sought after pieces of whitefish in the Pacific Northwest. It's a flatfish, and we all know the difference between a flat and a round fish, right? Flatfish swims like this, round fish swims like that. Okay? It's also known a whitefish, and whitefishes are lean fish, they're not a fatty fish. Okay, so most of your flatfishes are whitefish and lean, and most of your round fishes are fatty and swim like this. Okay, now this fish has 4 fillets. And the other thing about it is this is the bottom of the fish. This is the top of the fish. So it's a bottom dweller at the bottom of the ocean, and it swims like this along the bottom. So when you're looking down at it, it's camouflaged. But when you're looking up at it, you don't see it against the sunlight because the other side's white. So it's a nice fish. Like when I first started out in the early 80s, these things were everywhere, cheap, like borscht. Now they're quite sought after because 80% of them either go to the States or offshores to Japan. Okay, so very, very few of them stay in BC like they used to. And in Europe, for example, they're farm raising them. They're doing that in Norway, where they net off the fjords, certain areas of Norway, and they raise them for commercial use. Okay, so the first thing I do when I get the fish is I cut the tail off due to the size of the fish. We usually get them in, they're smaller, they're about 20 pounders. Okay? And as Mark likes to say, they're little chickens. We call them chickens of the sea, little chickens. This one's a big, old, laying brood hair hen. It's been around for a long, long time. And if anybody's gone fishing, if you catch one of these, especially when they're this side, it's like pulling up a wet queen-size mattress. Okay? The other thing is, when they get really, really big, when they get into about the 75 pounders, the 90 pounders, they can wreck your boat. So they will shoot them in the water before they bring them in. Okay, so the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to take off the head section. And then after they get the head off, I can explain the bone structure of the fish a little better. So whenever I do is I get my big knife and I go underneath that fin. And I'm going to flip it over and do the same on the other side. Now, we also keep the bones of these fish for stock. We always want to keep a lean fish for stock because if the fattier the stock, the stronger the fish flavor. And the other thing you need to notice is there's a little white line in the top of the fish, and there's one on the other side of the fish too.
Major.
Okay? That's what I'm going to use to help determine where my fillets are in the fish. Okay?
Symmetrical, both sides? Top and
Well, you've got the belly, so not always, right?
Yeah.
The top part of the fish is where you're going to have the better fillet, the more prime fillet. You've got to deal with the belly of the fish right here, right? Now, we don't get them with head on because they take the cheeks out of them when they process them, right? Because halibut cheeks are quite popular. So now all I'm going to do with my boning knife, as you can see I used a heavier knife here, I'm just going to follow that line. And if you look at the top here, you can see my spine. I'm just going to follow that line from my spine. And that's how I'm going to get my fillets off. And when you feel in there, it's almost a little bit like a chicken breast. You have a cartilage that goes up and around. Then you have your bone, so it goes up like that. And all I'm going to do is just cut the fillets off that bone. So Corey is so beautifully volunteered his class to help us cost the fish out. What it costs to bring it in, what our usable product is, what our waste is. Okay? So this was 600 and,
92.
so the price of this just went up when we take all the bones off. Because we still have to pay for that.
My estimation is that fish for the meat that you're gonna have to sell off of it is gonna cost you maybe, it's gonna be equivalent to about $1,000.
Yeah.
You'll lose 30%, I guess.
Easy. And as I do this, I want my knife to be always on the bone. Because if this is a $1,000 fish, I want to get as much meat off this as I possibly can. So I have to recoup that cost.
Do is just weigh the weight of the fillets that you're gonna have to actually sell when you're done, and divide 692 by that weight, and it'll give you your actual cost per pound.
Now I'm also using my fish boning knife, or sorry, my filleting knife. It's got to have some flexibility to it. Okay. If you don't have that flexibility, you can't get the knife along the bone. And I'm primarily only using the top half to 1/3 of my knife when I do this on the fish. And you have to get your hands in there. So if you don't like the way the fish feels, and we've had students that, oh, I can't touch fish. Well, I'm sorry about that. Now the smaller ones are a lot easier to clean because you're dealing with a heck of a lot smaller fillet.
But your yield will be better on a larger.
That's right, yep. So they're just coming into season right now, right?
They've been available for about the last 4 weeks, but I can't afford them. That's why there's a lot more rockfish on the menu than there used to be halibut. Fillet right there. Okay, so that's one fillet. Now I'm going to deal with the belly fillet. And this is always the interesting one because you're dealing with the stomach. Now, the fillets on the other side are exactly the same. Okay, I have belly fillet and I have top fillet.
Are you turning your blade a little bit into the bone?
I'm just using the bone as a guide and I'm riding the blade on the bone.
So we're just getting?
Yep. Now I'll show you when I go to take the skin off that process as well. So whenever I clean a fish, I always say to the students, use the bones as your guide. If you follow the bone, you will always get the maximum amount of meat off that fish. Now whether it's a salmon or trout, sole's a little different. Lingcod, they all clean exactly the same because they have very similar bone structure. So there's my stomach fillet. Now I'll flip that over and do exactly the same, okay? But what I'm going to do now is I'm going to show you guys how to clean up the fillet, especially the stomach fillet. As we can see, we've got our stomach portion, there's a little bit of bone on here, that all has to come off, because the whole idea when I'm done with this fish that is totally boneless. Okay, I don't want any bones in here. And those that have cleaned trout and salmon with me know that we always have the fish tweezers and we pull the pin bones out. Well, you don't have pin bones on a halibut if you clean it properly. You should be totally boneless. So I'm just going to take these bones off. And then again, with my hands, I'm just gonna feel that I've got everything off. So now, to take my skin off, I'm gonna lay the fillet close to the edge of the board, and I'm gonna get my knife and I'm gonna hold it flat on the board like this, and I'm just gonna work it back and forth as I pull the skin. I'm gonna make sure that all this bone and this fat on the side is off. I always cut myself a little handle for my hand. And I'm pulling. This fillet is almost bigger than my knife. And there's my fillet. And if we look at this, you can see that I can tell I haven't done this in a while. I left a little bit of meat on there, okay? Because I didn't have my knife totally flat. It should be like that. See, I left all that on. Okay, and when you, like Corey was mentioning, when you weigh this, you want to maximize every little bit of this you can, especially when you're looking at a $1,000 fish. Okay, does anybody have any questions so far? So again, when I do the other side, it's exactly the same, only it's the dark side. And again, you can see I've got my line, and that line is going to go right up to the spine here. Okay, I'm just going to give my knife a rub. And again, I'm going to feel that little ridge that will help me separate my fillets. Okay, got a little aggressive there, left some bone in. Okay, so there's my other one. My other big dog. And we'll go to the belly. Morgan, you've cleaned one of these, haven't you?
Yeah.
Okay, there's my fillet, and here's my bones. Now for the bones, obviously we're not going to have a great big hunk of bone like that, right? So just that in a bag and we'll freeze that and we have that for fish stock. Okay, does anybody have any questions? Because if you have, now's the time to ask me.
Is there any specific reason that you started with the white side?
No, not really. Just, it was easier to see the line. That's why, for me. It all depends on, everybody's going to do it different, right? I'm going to do it different than Adam, do it different than Corey, Amber, Mark, Kim. We're all going to do it different because you have to make sure you're thinking, I got to get the maximum amount of meat off this thing. That's the important thing. Okay? And again, when I was in industry, I would clean maybe 2 of these a week. Now I clean one once every 4 months. So it's like anything, when you have lots of repetition, it's a heck of a lot easier than when you do it once in a while. Okay? Any more questions? Okay guys, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Glad you could be a part of this.